Hello, and welcome back to Storytime with Zimmer. Recently, I published my first book on Amazon entitled The Mighty Dozen. It's a short superhero story I wrote that I thought I would like to share with the world. But I thought I'd do a read aloud for anyone who would like to actually hear the book. If you want to buy the book, there's a link in the description of this video where you can find it on Amazon. The Mighty Dozen by Eric C. Zimmer. Only $15. But for those of you who would like to hear the book, let's get started. The synopsis is, outside of an old summer camp somewhere in Nevada, a glowing meteor has crashed on Earth. Sent to investigate are young detectives James Reitherman and Catherine Nordberg, who bring some of their old camp friends along for the ride. Little did they know that this would be a night that changed their lives forever. Alright, let's begin. Prologue. An accident or blessing in disguise. Whatever the case may be, it was a night that changed their lives forever. It was on that night, in the middle of April of 1981, when 12 young people, most of whom were childhood friends, became known as the Mighty Dozen. But before we get into the actual story, I must first fill you in on a little history about each of the 12 characters and how they came to be. For about 30 years or so, until his death in December of 1980, there was a summer camp on the southern shore of Pyramid Lake, 40 miles northeast of Reno, Nevada, run by a man named Arthur Gammelthorpe and his wife Frances. She had passed away from cancer in the summer of 1975. The future members of the Mighty Dozen had spent most of their summers growing up at this camp, became good friends, and kept in touch with each other through letters during the school year. Here is a little background information about the characters. James Matthew Reitherman, born February 11th, 1960, the leader of the Mighty Dozen, and the oldest, strongest, and tallest person on the team. A bodybuilder, James was built like a football player. James's life did not have the happiest of beginnings. His father, George Reitherman, a successful businessman, was murdered about 3 months before James was born, and to this date, no one knew who was responsible for his murder. Until he was 8 years old, James was raised by his loving mother, Vivian Grunstra, a singer, until she was killed in a road accident, which almost took James's life as well. His mother was driving him to the summer camp I had just mentioned. Because of his mother's death, James occasionally suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, and talking about his mother was not always easy for him. However, she did leave her mark on James. Due to her unconditional love and ability to single-handedly raise him while working at the same time, James gained a strong respect not just for his mother, but for women in general. Upon arriving at the camp and upon hearing of his mother's death, Arthur and Frances placed James under their care for the entire summer, and he subsequently returned to the camp every year until he was 18. During the school year, James lived in Burbank, California, with his Uncle Henry and Aunt Betty and their 4 children. His Aunt Betty was his father's younger sister. Although they sometimes clashed, James considered Arthur like a father figure and bonded with him at camp over the years. James now worked as a police detective since graduating high school. He had been working in Reno for the past year, although he was planning to move back to Burbank the following summer. Underneath his rough exterior was a gentle, emotional, vulnerable giant with an appreciation for the smaller things in life. Catherine Eleanor Nordberg, a.k.a. Carly, born August 11th, 1960. Carly first met James in the summer of 1968, and over the years the two became a couple. Like James, Carly grew up in Burbank. They attended the same schools, and decided to become a police detective with him. One reason is because as campers, and eventually junior counselors, James and Carly made a great team when it came to leading the other campers and keeping everybody in order. She was nicknamed Carly after singer Carly Simon, starting when she was 6, because so many other girls with her name went by Kat or Kathy, and her parents wanted her to have a more unique nickname to stand out. Carly liked her nickname so much that she used it all the time, except on legal papers, and only allowed a few people, like James, to call her Catherine. Despite her loving her time at camp and being active in sports, even though she was the smallest person on the team, Carly was not much of a tomboy, loved the color pink, and loved to get her hair styled and nails polished. Carly was also very close to Arthur because James was very close to him, and because the two were practically inseparable. Whether it was at camp or at school, if they weren't with their respective groups of friends, James and Carly's were always seen together. In fact, they actually lived together in a 2-story ranch-styled house in the suburbs of Reno for the past year when Carly moved in with James. Richard Francesco Lounsbury, born April 15, 1961. Richard is the second in command of the Mighty Dozen. He was James's best friend at the camp, along with Frank Kimball. The four of them, James, Carly, Richard, and Frank, all met for the first time at the camp in 1968. And he was the one whom James corresponded the most with through letters. Many people considered James and Richard to be like brothers, even though they looked nothing like each other. James was muscular, had dark brown hair, brown eyes, and clear skin, whereas Richard was very skinny, had dirty blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and freckles all over. Also, while James was more quiet and reserved most of the time, Richard was happy-go-lucky and full of life, and an endless amount of energy. Originally from Omaha, Nebraska, Richard, along with his girlfriend Christy, was now attending medical school at UCLA to become a doctor like his father Kenneth. Christiana Connie Cleworth, a.k.a. Christy, born October 8, 1961. Christy was Carly's best friend at the camp, and Richard's girlfriend since their days at summer camp. She grew up in Rogersville, Missouri, where her family worked on Sunshine Valley Farm, growing peaches, blueberries, raspberries, and apples, along with her brother Raymond, sister Debbie, and widowed father Tom. Her mother, whose name was Connie, died when she was 3.5 years old. Due to growing up on a farm and living in a rural area, Christy was more tomboyish in behavior, loved getting dirty, and did not let anybody try to take advantage of her, ever. A big girl who excelled in sports, she could tackle most of the boys. Underneath that rough exterior of hers is a gentle young woman who acts like a surrogate mother to children. Frank Hiram Kimball, born January 17, 1961. Frank first met his friends at the summer camp in 1968, and has been friends with all of them ever since. One of the most intelligent members of the team, Frank was an expert mechanic who can fix any car, being that he came from a family of mechanics. His father, Donald, grandfather, Leonard, and 3 brothers, Donnie, Glenn, and Darrell, were all mechanics, and his great-grandfather, Hiram, had been a clockmaker. Originally from Ogden, Utah, Frank recently moved to Glendale, California with his older brother Donnie, and they opened their own auto shop together. Although a friend to the whole team, Frank could sometimes be a bit blunt when irritated beyond his limit, but he could also be cowardly at times. However, he always came through in the end and stood up for his friends. Gary Kostas Diamantopoulos, born July 25, 1962. Originally from Long Beach in Southern California, Gary began attending the summer camp in 1969, where he became best friends with Frank and another boy named Joey. As a kid, Gary had a tendency to flirt with any girl he met, often to their annoyance. He also grew up listening to the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and was a huge fan of 1960s rock music in general. Although he was often accused of not taking anything seriously as a boy, Gary had since matured, for the most part, and was now working as a lifeguard in Long Beach. Being from a large Greek family, hence his last name, Gary also worked part-time in his family's diner by the coastal beach. Joseph Edwin Thornton, a.k.a. Joey, born March 30th, 1963. One of the younger members of the team, Joey was currently a senior in high school, living in Mesa, Arizona, planning to study construction in college that fall. As a kid, Joey looked up to the other kids and even hero-worshipped a few of them like James and Frank. He also liked to eat a lot, but despite his chubby appearance, Joey was surprisingly active, even doing varsity wrestling at his school. Although immature and emotional at times, Joey is the kind of person you want to be around when you're feeling down. Pedro Julio Fernandez, born November 16, 1963. Originally from Santa Fe, New Mexico, Pedro was currently in his senior year of high school. An avid animal lover, Pedro planned to study zoology in college. He first met his friends from the summer camp in 1972, and with their help, he became more fluent in English. Until he was 11, Pedro spoke mostly Spanish at home and at school before attending public school for the first time. Highly intelligent and full of energy, Pedro was always ready to lend a helping hand, and if you had a question about any plant or animal, he was always the one to ask. Reginald Angus MacGyver, born April 27, 1962. Unlike all the other characters, Reginald did not actually attend the summer camp. Originally from Scotland, Reginald moved to America with his family for a better life after losing their farm. He met the others over at Pyramid Lake during the summer of 1980 and lived with Arthur, who provided him with funds to attend the University of Southern California, where he was currently studying to become an English professor. Book-smart with a calm, patient demeanor, Reginald was a good friend to everybody on the team. Although he did have a tendency to talk too much at times, or use sophisticated words that others don't always understand. Edward Cecil McDowell, a.k.a. Eddie, born September 24, 1968. One of the three newest members of the team, Eddie was a camper in his preteen years. His father abandoned his family when he was 2, and subsequently died, and his mother had passed away 6 months prior to the beginning of this story. Peter Hugo Burkhart and Clara Miriam Burkhart, born February 5, 1967. Fraternal twins and 2 of the 3 newest members of the team. Although they sometimes fight like all twins, they can always count on each other when times are hard. Peter and Clara also spent most of their preteen years at the camp and became friends with Eddie, although their antics at the camp often got them into trouble. Their parents were killed 2 years earlier in a car crash.